She didn't look up when he came through the door. Dolores Craith-Fenmore sat at the kitchen table, his kitchen table, with a real estate broker's folder spread open in front of her like she was chairing a board meeting. A half-empty coffee cup at her elbow, a pen already uncapped. 3 weeks. His wife had been in the ground for 3 weeks. "I've taken steps to handle the property," Dolores said. Her voice was the same as it had always been, clipped, precise, the kind of voice that delivers cruelty wrapped in the language of concern. "The family needs closure, Everett, and you clearly aren't in a state to manage this." She said this the way you'd say the mess. Sully was behind her, leaning against the doorframe to the hall. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He had always let his mother carry the words while he carried the weight of agreement behind them, and today was no different. Everett stepped into the kitchen. He set his portfolio on the counter. He pulled out a chair. He sat down. But to understand what happened in that kitchen, what was really happening, you have to understand who Everett Soane-Whitfield was before grief made him invisible to the people who had always wanted him to be. He had spent 15 years as a municipal title examiner for the county assessor's office, a man who read property deeds the way other people read sentences, parsing the language of ownership, survivorship, and encumbrance with the same ease most people use to read a menu. He knew what words in a legal document were ornamental and what words were load-bearing walls. He had left that work to care for Celeste during her illness. 3 years of driving her to appointments, of learning the names of medications, of sleeping in hospital chairs. He had traded the office for the vigil, quietly, without complaint, because that was the kind of man he was. Dolores Craith-Fenmore had never asked what he did before. She had never asked much about him at all. That was her first mistake. She slid the stack of documents across the table. Neat, tabbed in red. The tab said, "Sign here," in small block letters. "It's straightforward," she said, refilling her coffee at the counter without looking at him. The house was always the Craith family's asset. Celeste understood that. She would have wanted her family to sort this properly, rather than let it sit in limbo while... She paused, selected a word. "While you find your footing." The phrase, "find your footing," landed the way she intended it to, as a kindness that was also a verdict. "You are unsteady. You are not capable. Step aside." Everett picked up the first document. He read it. He turned the page and read the next one. Dolores came back to the table. She sat. She checked her phone. She recrossed her ankles. He kept reading. The silence seemed to unsettle her slightly. She had expected either resistance or surrender, and he was offering neither. He was simply reading, with the unhurried attention of a man who already knew what he was looking for. Sully shifted in the doorway. Everett reached the 7th document in the stack. He read it. He read it again. Then, without a word, without a change in expression, he slid it clear of the pile and laid it face down inside his leather portfolio. Dolores was looking at her phone. He signed the remaining pages where the red tabs indicated. Neat, legible, unhurried. The signature of a man who had signed a great many documents in his life and understood the difference between a signature and a surrender. He squared the stack. He pushed it back across the table. Dolores set down her phone and collected the papers with the brisk efficiency of someone closing a transaction. She did not count them. Before he stood, Everett said something quiet, almost to himself, almost to the room. He said that Celeste had always kept a copy of everything at the office, that she was meticulous that way. Dolores made a small sound, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh. The sound of someone humoring a grieving man who has said something that doesn't quite track. She gathered her folder. She capped her pen. If you found this story, if you keep coming back to this channel because you believe that the truth has a way of rising no matter how hard someone tries to bury it, then you already know why this story matters. The people who watch here aren't looking for noise. They're looking for the moment the record gets set straight. Subscribe if that's you. You belong here. He picked up his portfolio. He walked to the front door. He opened it, stepped through, and pulled it closed behind him. At the truck, he stopped. He looked back at the house, and anyone watching closely enough would have seen it. Just for a moment, just at the edge of his expression, something that was not grief on his face. 12 days. That was how long it took. 12 days after Dolores Craith-Fenmore sat at that kitchen table with her broker's folder and her certainty and her refilled coffee. 12 days after Everett walked out to his truck and looked back at the house with something that was not quite grief on his face, the sign went up. He saw it from the road. He did not stop. He slowed, read the agency name on the writer below the sign, read the phone number, and drove on. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, but something behind his eyes went very quiet. The particular quiet of a man who has just confirmed what he already suspected. The listing was already live by the time he pulled over 3 blocks away and looked it up on his phone. 14 photos, taken without his knowledge, without his presence, without anyone asking. The kitchen, Celeste's kitchen, with the blue tile she had chosen herself, the one Dolores had called a peculiar choice at Christmas dinner the year they installed it. The back bedroom with the afternoon light she loved. And then the studio. Her paintings were still on the walls, every one of them, hung exactly where Celeste had placed them. And now they were listed as charming interior details in a property description that called the room a flex space, ideal for a home office or 4th bedroom. Everett sat with that for a long moment. Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket, picked up the leather portfolio, and drove to the church hall. The repast had been organized by Celeste's former colleagues from the school district where she had taught for 11 years. The hall smelled of baked macaroni and someone's grandmother's sweet potato pie. People moved through it the way people do at these things, gently, slightly sideways, never quite sure where to put their hands. Dolores Craith-Fenmore worked the room like she was hosting it. She moved from cluster to cluster with a practiced ease that Everett recognized from 30 years of watching her at family gatherings. The same measured warmth she deployed at fundraising dinners and church committees, the kind that made people feel they were being taken care of, even as she was taking something from them. He heard fragments as he moved through the room. "I'm handling the estate. It's a lot, but someone has to." Everett agreed it was best. He's not an estate, poor man. We all know how he gets. The property needs to be resolved. Celeste would have wanted the family to have closure. He watched people's faces change when they looked at him. He knew that look. He had been receiving some version of it for 3 weeks, the soft-eyed, head-tilted look of condolence. But now there was something layered beneath it, a new quality, something closer to pity than grief. The look people give a man they believe has already lost, not his wife, but his footing. He accepted it quietly. He thanked people for coming. He ate nothing. He almost missed her. She was near the far door, speaking briefly with one of Celeste's former colleagues, when she turned and found him across the room. She moved toward him without hurry, and when she reached him, she embraced him the way old acquaintances do at funerals, warmly, briefly, with intention. Then she pressed a card into his hand. "Celeste made me promise," she said, low enough that no one else would catch it. And then she was gone, moving toward the door with the same unhurried ease with which she had arrived, satchel over her shoulder, already somewhere else in her mind. Dolores watched the exchange. Her eyes moved from the woman to Everett, then back to the door. Something passed across her face. Not alarm, not quite. The mild attention of someone who has noticed a detail they cannot immediately categorize. Then Sully said something to her from her left and she turned away, and the moment was filed and forgotten. She did not ask who the woman was. That would matter later. That evening, he called the listing agent. He introduced himself as Everett Soane-Whitfield. He said he was the surviving spouse of the deceased owner and had a question about the property's title search. The agent paused. The pause was brief, but it was there. "The record shows one owner," the agent said. "The sellers have full authority to proceed. Everything's been verified." "Is the property search showing one owner or 2? Everett asked. Another pause. Longer this time. The agent said he would have to confirm with the title company, but that as far as he understood, the record reflected a single owner. "Thank you," Everett said. "I appreciate your time." He hung up. He looked at the word on the notepad. Then he set the pen down, reached into the leather portfolio, and drew out the card Adira had pressed into his hand at the church hall. He placed it carefully on the table beside the notepad. He did not call the number, not yet. Instead, he opened the manila envelope. He had carried it in the portfolio since the day he found it in the studio, tucked behind one of Celeste's canvases, in a spot he recognized because it was the same spot she had kept her passport for 20 years. He had not opened it in front of Dolores. He had not opened it in front of anyone. Page by page, he photographed everything. Celeste's handwriting, dense and careful, filled margin after margin. Documents he had not yet fully read. Language he recognized from 15 years of work he had never mentioned to his mother-in-law. He worked until past midnight. Then he set the phone down, stacked the pages back into the envelope, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen. His phone buzzed. He turned it over. Sully Craith, 11:58 p.m. Offer accepted. Closing in 21 days. You should probably get your stuff out. 21 days is a specific kind of cruelty. Long enough to feel like mercy, short enough to make sure you feel every one of them. Everett read Sully's text once, set his phone face down on the counter. Then he went to bed, because there was nothing else to do that night that mattered. He started packing the next morning. Not frantically, not the way a man who has lost everything packs. Methodically. The way a man packs when he knows exactly what belongs to him and exactly what does not. He wrapped Celeste's ceramics in newsprint. He labeled boxes with a black marker in clean block letters. He left her studio untouched. That was the one room he did not enter. He was on the second bedroom when he heard the front door open without a knock. Sully walked in like the house already had his name on it. He stood in the living room, turned a slow half circle, and called toward the hallway without looking for Everett first. The dining table stays. Mom wants it. A pause. Then, louder. And the armoire in the master. That was my grandmother's. Everett set the box down on the floor. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and watched. Sully moved through the rooms the way people move through spaces they've already decided belong to them, touching the back of a chair here, opening a cabinet there, narrating to no one in particular what the family would keep and what could go. He did not ask Everett a single question. His phone rang. He answered it walking, and his voice shifted into the register people use when they want to sound like they know what they're talking about. Yeah, the property's been in the Craith family going on 30 years. Clean history, no complications. A pause. He laughed at something the other person said. No, we're not worried about any of that. It's straightforward. He wandered back toward the kitchen, still talking, and did not notice that Everett had not moved. 30 years in the Craith family. That was true, in the way that certain statements are technically accurate and legally meaningless at the same time. The land had a history, but the house, the structure Celeste and Everett had refinanced together, titled together, built a life inside together. That was a different instrument entirely. And Sully, who had been handed things his whole life, had never needed to learn the difference. Everett picked up his box and went back to packing. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had arrived. Marcus Osei-Bonsu had known Everett since before Celeste, since the years when Everett was still driving to the county assessor's office 5 days a week, and coming home with stacks of plat maps and easement files he'd spread across the kitchen table after dinner. He showed up with a case of water, a box of garbage bags, and the particular gift of a man who does not ask how you're doing when he can see exactly how you're doing. They worked for an hour without saying much. Marcus taped boxes. Everett sorted. The house made its small sounds around them. Then Marcus paused, looked at Everett's back, and said, "You know she has no idea who she's doing this to." Everett didn't answer right away. "I know," he said finally. Marcus shook his head slowly. 15 years, man. 15 years you spent reading deeds for a living. The woman tried to slip a quitclaim past a municipal title examiner. He almost smiled. Almost. Because that was the thing about Dolores Craith-Fenmore. She had looked at Everett and seen what grief is supposed to look like. A man diminished, overwhelmed, grateful for someone to take things off his hands. She had seen what she expected to see, and she had moved accordingly. She had not asked what he did before Celeste got sick. She had not thought to. 15 years at the county assessor's office. Thousands of deeds reviewed. Chain of title, legal descriptions, instruments of conveyance. Everett had read them the way other people read novels. He knew which words created rights and which words only sounded like they did. He knew exactly what he had signed at that kitchen table, and he knew exactly what he hadn't. Marcus left before dark. Sully had been gone for hours. Everett sat down at the kitchen table. He opened the leather portfolio and removed the document. The one page he had slid quietly from Dolores's stack 3 weeks ago, before she could count them. He laid it flat. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop. He picked up his phone and made a single call. The scene does not give the audience the name he dialed. It does not need to. What it gives instead is this: Everett's voice, low and steady, saying, "I think we're ready." The closing was 9 days away, and for the first time, Everett was not packing boxes. He was sitting very still, waiting. 9 days is a long time when you know something the other side doesn't. Everett had stopped packing boxes on a Tuesday. He had not explained to anyone why. He simply sat and read and waited. The way a man waits when he is not afraid of what is coming, but patient for the moment it arrives. Dolores, for her part, had moved with the confidence of someone who had already won. She had accepted the buyer's offer. She had signed the seller's disclosure. She had told 3 separate people at her church that she was wrapping up the estate, a phrase that smoothed over the edges of what she was actually doing. She believed the paperwork was complete. She believed Everett had signed everything she needed him to sign. She had not counted the pages when she took them back. Sully had texted the buyer's agent that morning to confirm the closing time. He had already decided where he was going to dinner afterward. The pre-closing title review was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Harmon and Delacroix Title Services, a modest office suite on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of recycled air and carpet cleaner. These reviews are routine, clerical almost. A title examiner runs the chain of ownership back through the county recorder's index, confirms no liens or encumbrances have been missed, and certifies the title for transfer. It takes 40 minutes on a clean file. This file was not clean. The examiner's name was Patricia Hennessy, and she had been reviewing property titles for the county for 11 years. She found the instrument at 9:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before anyone arrived for the review. It was a deed of trust with right of survivorship, recorded 6 months before Celeste Craith-Soane's death, properly witnessed, properly notarized, stamped and indexed in the county recorder's office under both names. It named Everett Soane-Whitfield as sole surviving beneficiary, meaning that upon Celeste's death, full titled ownership transferred to him by operation of law, automatically, without probate, without a will, without anyone's permission. Patricia flagged the file and called her supervisor before she called anyone else. By the time Dolores and Sully arrived, there was already a different quality to the room. The title officer, a measured man named Gerald Poole, who wore reading glasses on a cord and chose every word with the care of someone who had delivered bad news before, explained that the closing was suspended pending legal review. He used the word suspended twice, which is how people in that profession signal that they mean it. Dolores's first response was that there must be an error. Sully's was louder. He said the property had been in the Craith family for 30 years. He said it with the absolute conviction of a man who had repeated it so many times it had become, for him, indistinguishable from fact. Gerald Poole listened. He nodded once. Then he explained, with the same professional patience he used for everyone, that the duration of the family's relationship to the land was not the relevant question. The relevant question was the instrument recorded in the county index, which was properly executed, properly witnessed, and governed the titled structure. That instrument superseded the land history. That was what the law said, and the law did not have feelings about it either way. Dolores looked at the folder as though it had said something offensive. For the first time in 3 weeks, perhaps longer, her composure did not hold. It did not shatter. It simply went thin, the way ice goes thin before it gives. A small muscle near her jaw moved. She pressed her fingers flat to the table. She asked how this was possible. She asked it quietly, which was worse than if she had raised her voice. The door to the conference room opened. Adira Bassett-Orone did not rush. She set her satchel down, took the chair beside Everett, and introduced herself to Gerald Poole by name and bar number before she introduced herself to anyone else in the room. Then she turned to Dolores. She said she was Celeste Craith-Soane's estate attorney of record. She said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time and simply hasn't been acknowledged yet. She placed a document on the table. It was the quitclaim deed Dolores had inserted into the stack at the kitchen table 3 weeks earlier. The one buried between the death certificate copies and the bank notification forms, tabbed for signature, framed as routine. The instrument that, had Everett signed it, would have transferred his entire survivorship interest to the Craith family estate and made everything Dolores had done since untouchable. Everett had not signed it. He had read it, recognized it for what it was, and slid it into his leather portfolio while Dolores refilled her coffee. Without his signature, it was paper. It had no legal effect. It never had. The room was very quiet. Dolores looked at the unsigned document. She looked at Adira. She looked, finally, at Everett. At the man she had told to get his things out, whose home she had photographed and listed and sold, whose grief she had treated as a logistical problem to be managed. She said, very quietly, she wouldn't have done this. Everett opened his leather portfolio. Dolores had said she wouldn't have done this, and Everett had opened his leather portfolio. What came out of it was not a legal brief. It was not a counter-argument. It was a manila envelope, cream-colored, slightly worn at the corners, labeled in handwriting that everyone in that room would have recognized anywhere. Celeste's handwriting. Precise, unhurried, the letters leaning gently to the right the way they always had. The label read, 4EV, do not open until you need it. Adira did not need to be told what was inside. She had helped Celeste build it. 6 months before Celeste died, 6 months when she was still well enough to sit at a desk and think clearly and love her husband with the particular ferocity of someone who knows exactly how much time is left. She had called Adira Bassett-Orone, not as a friend, as an attorney. She had described her mother's history in precise, documented terms. The loan that became a claim, the inheritance rerouted through a signature Celeste had been 19 years old when she gave, the pattern that had run like a quiet current beneath the Craith family's genteel surface for 3 decades. And then she had done something extraordinary. She had drafted a quiet title action herself, with Adira's guidance, naming Dolores Craith-Fenmore and Sullivan Craith as potential adverse claimants to the property on Aldermore Lane. She had attached a notarized letter describing the pattern. She had signed it, had it witnessed, and had left the entire package in the envelope marked for Everett. She had not told him what was in it. She had only told him where it was. Always kept a copy of everything at the office. He had set it at the kitchen table 3 weeks after her funeral, voice flat with grief, and Dolores had looked through him as though he were furniture. Celeste had known her mother would move fast. She had known Dolores would read Everett's grief as weakness and his silence as surrender. She had built the armor before she was gone because she understood, with a clarity that grief would have blurred, that the people who loved her most would need their hands free to mourn. The room was very quiet. Dolores read the letter once. Then she set it down and did not touch it again. Sully, who had spent 41 years smirking before he spoke, said nothing. There was nothing available to smirk at. The document in front of him had been drafted by his own sister. Notarized, witnessed, filed as an exhibit. The title officer, who had seen a great deal in 20 years of closings, folded his hands on the table and waited. Adira filed the quiet title action that afternoon. The record it rested on was, in the language of property law, uncontested. The deed of trust executed 6 months before Celeste's death. The right of survivorship, properly recorded, properly witnessed. The failed quitclaim, the document Dolores had slipped into the stack at the kitchen table, the one Everett had quietly removed and placed in his portfolio before signing the rest. And Everett's own professional history. 15 years as a municipal title examiner for the county assessor's office. 15 years of reading instruments exactly like these, which established beyond any reasonable argument that when he had not signed that document, it was not because he had missed it. He had seen it. He had understood it perfectly. He had simply declined. 2 weeks later, a judge reviewed the record. There was no dramatic hearing, no gallery, no raised voices. The record was what it was, complete, coherent, and assembled by a woman who had loved her husband enough to think clearly when thinking clearly cost her something. The ruling confirmed Everett Soane-Whitfield as sole lawful owner of the property on Aldermore Lane. Dolores Craith-Fenmore and Sullivan Craith were ordered to reimburse the buyer's earnest money from their personal funds. They had initiated an unauthorized sale of a property they did not own. The buyer had acted in good faith. The cost of that error belonged to the people who had created it. There was no appeal filed. There was nothing to appeal. The listing came down the same day the ruling was issued. Everett drove to the house that afternoon. He stood in the yard for a while without going inside. A neighbor walking a dog lifted a hand from across the street. He lifted his back. Then he went in. Celeste's studio was the last room he came to. The paintings were still there, stacked against the walls by the real estate photographer who had moved them for better angles, never once asking if that was something he was allowed to do. Everett stood in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then he picked up the first canvas. It was one he recognized. A landscape she had painted the summer before she got sick. A field somewhere in the hill country, golden and enormous, the kind of sky that made you feel small in a good way. She had hung it on the east wall so it caught the morning light. He hung it back where it belonged. One by one, he put them back, each one in the place she had chosen. He did not rush. He had spent months watching other people decide what his life should look like, what his grief should look like, what his silence meant. None of them had thought to ask what Celeste had built before she left. She had built this, a house that could not be taken, a record that could not be argued with, a letter that said, in her own handwriting, everything she had never been able to say at a family table without the conversation being redirected back to Dolores. She had loved him with foresight. That was the word for it. Not sentiment, foresight. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Dolores's attorney requesting a conversation about the estate. Everett set it on the kitchen table beside his leather portfolio and did not open it. If you believe the truth has a way of arriving exactly when it's needed, drop a word in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to see it today. The people who watch until the end are the ones who understand that quiet is not the same as defeated. If that's you, you know where the subscribe button is.